Hey team, welcome to episode 30 of the Golf Never Sleeps podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Roblard, and this week on the podcast, we're going to talk about 6 things you can do right now to have more effective practice. To give a little bit of context, so we're in the early part of January, and for a lot of players, they have the mindset, new year, new me. They start to flip the script, starting to think that we're on the downside of winter, spring is coming, and they start to kind of wrap their head around the changes they want to make for this upcoming season. And oftentimes, a lot of people start to make commitments that they're going to spend a little bit more time practicing and doing some different things to try to have a better 2024 on the golf course. Now, with that, what I see with a lot of players is I see them make a lot of common mistakes, which I think just gets them stuck in this consistent track of I never really get that much improvement out of my practice. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's break it down. I've got 6 things here that I want to talk about today. So the first thing that I want you to do, thing number one, item number one for more effective practice is your practice begins long before you get to either the driving range or your indoor simulator at home or the place you hit balls, the dome or whatever it is. Your practice session actually begins long before that. What you do in terms of hydration, nutrition, and warm-up that day, matters a lot. And what I mean by that, it's common for people that are working, they'll do their practice after work. Imagine a scenario where you work your 9 to 5 job, and during that day, you don't have your best eating day, you don't consume a lot of water, or you're not really properly hydrated, and then you get to your practice session, you don't warm up, and you just start hitting balls. How are you set up for success? The answer is you're not. So I'm going to preface all this by saying I completely understand, and I'm going to keep in mind that everyone here is extremely busy and we don't have a lot of time. And let's say you're a player that you only have 1 day a week to practice. Then making sure you're as prepared as you can be matters even more. So an important way to look at it, let's say, what's the point I'm trying to make here? What I would love to see you do before you practice is plan in advance. Try to make the day that you practice the day that you are working on hydrating yourself the best, so drinking way more water than you normally do. And you're trying to have your best eating day that day as well. Because if you have a bunch of sugar and no water at breakfast, if you have fast food at lunch, you're not really putting yourself in the best position to feel as optimal as you want to be for that practice. So, item number 1 is I need you to pay better attention to what you do before you get to that practice session. If you practice Tuesdays after work, I need you to commit to drinking way more water during the day on Tuesdays. I need Tuesdays to be the day that you're going to eat your best in terms of healthy foods or whatever that may be from your diet. I'm not a dietitian, just making a recommendation. And the third part is, let's say you're going to commit to stretching for 5 or 10 minutes. If you do nothing, just 5 or 10 minutes before you get out of the house that day. So you now arrive at that practice session. You've done a little bit of stretching in the morning. You're hydrated and you've got some good food in your body. Now we have a chance to perform at an optimal level. So that's number 1. What you do beforehand in terms of nutrition and some fitness stuff. Number 2. There's a few important decisions you have to make before this practice session. And an important one is, what is the goal of that practice session? Are you working on your golf swing? Like there's a change you're trying to make and you have drills that you're trying to work on? Are you trying to work on distance control with how far your irons go or how far your clubs go? Let's say you've been working on your swing for a while and now you're trying to see if these changes have adjusted how far your clubs go. Are you working on club head speed for that session? Are you planning for this session, the only thing you're working on is trying to increase your club head speed? Are you working on your short game? let's say you have a golf trip coming up and you've been working on your golf swing for a couple of weeks. Now you want to spend a little bit of time working on your short game. Making this decision before you arrive at your practice session is extremely important, because what normally happens is players will show up with their large basket of balls and then they'll start making these decisions, and what happens is they waste a lot of time and they waste a lot of golf balls. A scenario is, let's say you've just had a golf lesson, or 2 weeks ago you had a golf lesson. So it's clear that you're working on your golf swing. What I think would be important to do is to try to lay out, just in a couple of minutes, what's your plan for that session. Let's say you're going to go through your warm-up when you get there, and then you've decided that you're going to work on specifically your irons, because you and your coach discussed that you're brand new into taking lessons and you just want to focus on trying to get some key concepts down with your irons before you work up into driver. Or it might be vice versa, where you've taken some lessons or you're feeling pretty good with irons and now you want to work on your driver. But I think it's really important to think about it beforehand, just so that we have a clear frame of mind. What's the most important thing for you to work on? And then let's execute that. Because when a player shows up to a session, they don't think about it a whole lot, and they say that they just want to work, quote unquote, on their golf swing. I believe that's very poorly defined. And then as a result, what it ends up happening is it just becomes like an exercise session where, yes, you swung the golf club and you got your heart rate up, but you didn't actually work on your golf swing. So number 2 would be making a decision beforehand on what is the goal of that practice session. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode. If you are, I have a favor to ask. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and make sure you hit that bell to make sure you get notified on when a new episode drops. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please make sure you subscribe there as well. But if you could leave me a rating wherever you're listening or watching, if you do those things for me, it really helps the podcast grow and also motivates me to put out more content. And as always, on any platform, if you ever have any questions, please reach out, let me know. I answered every comment. Now let's get you back to your episode. All right, so number 3, what do you have to set up when you arrive? What I see happen far too often is a player will show up, they'll put their bag down, they'll drop their basket of balls, and they just start hitting balls. Or what a lot of players will tell me is they'll put balls down and they'll grab a wedge and they just start hitting kind of some half wedges, because for them, that's what they call their warm-up. And then they never set up what they have to set up. What I mean by that is, what are the tools you're going to use today? And, well, for every player, I believe that it has to be, let's get our alignment rods out. If you use training aids, let's get our training aids out. If you record video, let's get our tripod out. And lastly, maybe most importantly, what I like to do a lot is divide your golf balls. And what I normally will do is I will divide my golf balls into little 5-ball bundles. And the reason why I do that is every bundle, I focus on one thing for those 5 shots. There's a chance after a 5-ball bundle that I might do another 5 balls of the same thing. But the reason why, and I literally, if you look at my range setup, I literally have little piles of 5 balls. But the reason why I do that is because my goal is, let's just focus on getting these 5 done. And I'm not going to think of anything else. I'm not going to let my focus shift until I get these 5 balls done. So let's go through how I would set up my workstation. I'd show up at the driver range, bag goes down. First thing I decide is I set up my alignment rods for where my first target is going to be. I'll normally set up 2. I'll set up one running parallel to my target line, which would be for my toe line. And then I'll set one up between my feet for ball position. So essentially my alignment rods are set up in a T. The next thing I'll do after that is I'll take out my tripod. I'll open up the legs and my tripod's completely set up. And normally I'll put my phone in my tripod so it's ready to go. So whenever I want to record video, it's like I've already just got it set up. All I've got to do is open up the camera and hit record. And then the last thing that I'll do is I'll set up my balls. And that'll take me roughly 2 or 3 minutes. But now what I have is, quote unquote, like my workstation is set. I'm ready to do work. And if you look at the things we've talked about so far, I've made sure I've taken care of my body that day. I've planned on what I'm going to do at that practice session. Both those happened before I got there. And then now, as soon as I get there, I set up my workstation. So those are the first three. Number 4, what's your feedback system? For a lot of players, you're going to look at me and say, what the heck is a feedback system? What are you going to use to measure progress for today's lesson? Is it going to be you're checking specific positions by video? Is it going to be that you're using the ball flight to tell you? If you're with a launch monitor, what data points on the launch monitor are you looking for feedback? I need you to consider this, because too often what happens, especially let's say you're a player that has just finished taking a lesson and the next week you go practice, and the biggest problem you have is you take the club really inside. And you and your coach have developed a couple of drills to work on preventing you taking the club inside. In that scenario, your feedback system better be video. Because if you don't have video, there's no way of knowing if you're actually taking the club less inside or not. And we cannot default to assuming that our feels are correct, because we know that our feels are rarely correct. Because let's say the end goal is you have a slice, and you have a slice because you come over the top, because you take the club inside. If you're just looking at the ball flight and you're seeing no change and don't know why, but your coach has told you that the main reason is because you take the club inside and you're not using the right feedback system, you're wasting time and you're delaying progress. Let's say you're a player that doesn't have access to tech or whatever it may be, and you really struggle with launching the ball way too high because you add a lot of dynamic loft. Then your feedback system would be watching the ball flight. And it's amazing when I'm on a driving range how often I see players hit a shot and they barely watch the ball fly for half a second, and they're already looking at the next golf ball, or they go to collect the next golf ball. So if your feedback system is whether you're trying to see can your hook get smaller, can the flight of the golf ball come down, your feedback system is watching the ball, you better be watching the ball for the entire flight until it lands. Because every millisecond that ball is in the air, that is your feedback system. So that's the 4th thing, which is what is your feedback system? So to summarize so far, we have planning our warm-up and taking care of our body before we get to the range. We have planning out what our practice is going to be for the day. What are we actually working on based on previous experience? Setting up your workstation when you arrive, and then what is your feedback system? Now, the 5th thing I'm going to talk about is quality versus quantity, because this is things that a lot of players get wrong as well. They will go to the driving range and they'll think because they have an hour that their goal is that they need to hit as many golf balls as they can in that hour. If you're making changes and you set up your workstation, different things like that, the thing I need you to consider is that the quality of your practice carries way more weight than the quantity of golf balls that you hit in 95% of scenarios. And if you think about it, if you play a round of golf and we talk full swings, especially if you're going to the range to work on your full swing, in a round of golf, you're making like 50 full swings around. And you're doing that over multiple hours. But yet we have a player that'll go to the driving range and they will buy the biggest basket of golf balls and they will hit 120 golf balls in an hour. That's a quantity game, and usually we don't see much progress. There's no practice swings, there's no feedback systems, they don't set up their workstation, different things like that. So the point I'm trying to make here is a mistake that a lot of players make is they look at quantity. If you go through this system, what I want you to look at is quality. Make sure your body's in good shape. Make sure your workstation is set up. and you don't need to buy as many balls. I could actually save you money, because what I will say, for a lot of scenarios, especially if you only have a short period of time, buy the smallest basket of balls you can, or buy a medium basket and work on quality golf shots for that period of time, and you'll get better faster, because you'll have your workstation set up, you'll have your feedback system in place, and you'll have less balls, which will raise the stakes for you to pay attention to those others, and you'll get better faster. The last one is actually my favorite practice hack, we'll call it. I'm not always a fan of the word hack, but I'll use it in this scenario. One thing I've encouraged a lot of players to do is use a 5-minute timer. We know that for a lot of us, we have a hard time focusing. Sometimes we can barely keep our focus for a couple of seconds, but yet we expect to go to the driving range and have just this incredibly high focus for an hour to do all this amazing work. We know that most of the time that's not the case. So let's say you've decided that you're going to work on your full swing, and you have the drill and you have everything set up. And let's say you've done your warm-up and you're going to start with your 9-iron. Set a 5-minute timer and just work on your task with that club for 5 minutes. When the timer goes off, that's your chance to go get a ball of water, or go get a drink of water, check your phone if you need to, get your camera set to record some video. But if you go in blocks of 5 minutes, what that will do is it'll give you a chance to say, okay, for these 5 minutes, focus on the task. And then once the timer goes off, I get a break, and then back on the task. What I will normally do is I will go and I will focus for 5 minutes. When my timer goes off, I'll set my timer for 60 seconds to give myself a 1-minute break, clear my head, grab my drink of water, and then I'll go back, change clubs or whatever it may be. But what happens is that in that 60-minute session, you're now getting 10 blocks of focus. And we go back to that quality game or that quantity game. Imagine you have 10 blocks of focus, and in between each block, you get a 1-minute break to reset. I think for a lot of you at a starting point, using something like a 5-minute timer is an incredibly easy way for you to just have a stop, a reset, and a resume. So, to summarize, the 6 things that we talked about. Organizing your body and your hydration for the day before you practice. Deciding before you get to the driving range what your practice session is going to be like and what drills you're going to do. Setting up your workstation upon arrival before you hit a golf ball. Set everything up. What's your feedback system going to be for that day? What system are you going off of? Is it camera? Is it watching the ball flight? Which one is it? It's a quality game. That's number 5. It's a quality game over a quantity game. And number 6 is set up something like a 5-minute timer to help you stay on task. So that has been my 6 things, which are very easy to do and cost no money. They just take a little bit of planning in advance for a more effective practice session. So many players, once they get into summer, they always want to play really good. The habits that we set in the off season and in our practice has so much to do with the habits that we have come summertime. I hope you'll use this as a guide, and maybe there's a couple things you do on here already, but maybe you'll pick something up that you don't do that might help improve your practice. As always, if you're a listener, I appreciate the support. This has been episode 30 of the Golf Never Sleeps podcast. We'll catch you next week. Happy golfing.